Good morning. You're listening to the Blaine's World podcast, or you're also watching it perhaps. And I'm Blaine Greenfield, and I'm the host, and I'm here in my studio in lovely downtown Fairview, North Carolina. And each week we do a show featuring some interesting folks, and I think you'll see the people we're interviewing today are really interesting. And you can catch us on Facebook Live, but you can also see us on your favorite podcast broadcast locale, so you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, you name it, you'll find us. And my guests today are Eddie LeShure and Margaret Kirschner, friends of mine, also co-owners of a Mindful Emergence, LLC, where they offer mindfulness, movement, and breathing practices for those who want to do a whole bunch of things. Before we talk about what these things are, folks, why don't you wave to all your fans and friends who are watching this? So if you're watching it, this is Eddie and Margaret, and they offer offer these practices for those who want to strengthen recovery from addictive behavior, prepare for integrative psychedelic experiences, or are struggling to integrate a spiritually transformative experience. Eddie is a certified alcohol and drug counselor, certified yoga instructor, meditation teacher, certified spiritual emergence coach, certified peer support specialist, breath work facilitator, and person in long-term recovery, also an all-around good guy. Margaret is a certified trauma-sensitive yoga therapist, certified alcohol and drug counselor, ACISTE certified mental health professional, certified peer support specialist, and also facilitator and birth doula. And let me ask you folks, first of all, in terms of all these various practices, and they're all kind of related, when you grew up as kids, did you know that you wanted to do all this kind of work? Like, let me start off with Eddie. Where'd you grow up, Eddie?
I grew up in upstate New York.
Okay, and so when you were in upstate New York, did you always know you wanted to be this trainer, facilitator,
No,
all-around guru?
I wanted to play center field for the New York Yankees.
Okay, well, they could still use you, so make a comeback. So what got you away from playing center field for the New York Yankees?
Lack of talent.
Okay, when did you discover that?
Probably when I was about 10.
Okay, so when did you discover, like, how did you get into this whole mindfulness, yoga, spiritual kind of practice?
Well, the short answer, if possible, is I actually started doing yoga when I was in prison because I had a drug problem. And as a result of the drug situation, I ended up in a place called Attica in upstate New York. I spent 2 years there, and I started doing yoga inside to try to keep from losing my mind. And it was very helpful in that respect. And then later I started meditating and continued to do yoga. And so this was just sort of a natural evolution in terms of the work that we do, because I just drew on the experience that I had. And also, I found recovery. That's an important point. So I had recovery, I had meditation, I had yoga. Yeah, does that answer your
It,
question?
it does. When did you start then a mindful emergence?
It was 8 years ago.
Okay, and I'll ask Margaret the same question. So, Margaret, you grew up where?
I grew up in Bristol, Connecticut,
Okay.
and my thing was I always wanted to be a mom. I think I came into this lifetime with the mothering archetype, and I have been nourishing and nurturing others, through their addictive process, and became a birth doula, and continuing to do that doulaing thing in a different kind of a way these days.
And you've been teaching yoga for 25 years?
Teaching yoga, teaching breath work, and it's all about nourishing our own psyche, body, and mind.
And what's really cool is that the both of you seem to be on the same wavelength, at least with respect to what you're doing. When did the two of you meet, and how?
That was 11 and a half years ago. I was part of a meditation group, and I walked into the room one Sunday morning and I looked and I thought, who is this? Wow, she's really cute, but I need to find out more about her. And I did.
And that started the road to a mindful
And
emergence.
she had no interest in me. Well, she wanted to be a friend, and so, but then my charm finally won out in the end.
Well, I was thinking what you said off the air. I was thinking, Margaret, it was his hair. That
I did like this kind of a look. This was very different for me, ponytail,
Yeah.
earring. Yeah,
Did he have it then?
yeah.
Oh yeah. I haven't
Okay.
changed in 15 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you started hanging out with each other, and then what led you to start a mindful emergence?
Well, I'll start. We were having a conversation one evening, and she said, "Well, you've been in recovery, and from what I understand, yoga and meditation have really been the key for you, Eddie, in not going back out and getting involved in that." And I said, "Yeah, absolutely." And she said, "Well, would you think treatment centers, places that try to help people find recovery, would be interested in these kinds of modalities, these kind of practices?" And I thought, well, that's a good question. So I started asking around, and I asked a guy who actually has worked in the field as a clinical addiction specialist. And he said, "Oh, yeah, absolutely." He said, "But here's the deal, you should get enrolled in a program to become licensed as alcohol and drug counselors. And then when you contact these places, they'll go, oh, well, this person is in training. Plus, you've got the meditation, you got the yoga. And of course, Margaret had been teaching forever. And she was also a trauma sensitive yoga therapist.
Yeah.
So he says, if you do that, you'll be bringing a lot to the table. And so we followed his advice. He actually became our clinical supervisor, which you need when you're enrolled in these programs. And the response we got back was, yeah. So we worked in that area for many years in different treatment and aftercare facilities, both for substance misuse and eating disorder.
Now, when they work with the two of you, do they work with you in person, or do you do this via Zoom or a combination?
Both in person and through Zoom. Yeah, we can certainly do it either way.
You talking about in the past or the present?
No, kind of the present now, where we are now.
Oh yeah, either way.
Either way it works.
But most people like the person-to-person contact.
Yeah, I would think so, but I guess it was helpful to you, not helpful, the pandemic. When you had the pandemic, all of a sudden, I guess you moved to more Zoom.
Yeah, I'll tell you, yesterday I had a session with a gentleman who lives in Nashville, Tennessee. We've been working together for almost 3 years. We've never met personally.
Well, no,
Everything has been on Zoom or occasionally phone calls when Wi-Fi goes out, you know.
but it's just amazing, isn't it? Same thing too. I do the podcast. I don't ever have to have people in person, and it's just really amazing that you can do that. But I still like, the person to person is great when you can do it, kind of thing. So do you have where you are now? You have an office there?
We have both a home where we see people, clients, and we also have an office 1 day a week. So we rent space 1 day a week. I'll be heading over there soon
That's right downtown on Merriman Avenue for
in Asheville.
those who know the Asheville area. It's right at the heart of town.
And talk also about your work. Is it primarily with individuals, or you do groups, or you do both?
We do individual work primarily.
Okay.
Sometimes there'll be a couple who contacts us. They want to do something together. So yeah.
And we
So-
teach workshops and things like that occasionally where there's a group, but the work
Yep.
is almost exclusively one-on-one.
When they work with you, are they working with the two of you, or one at a time, or do you ever work the two of you together?
It depends on the situation. Sometimes it's individual, but especially in the work with plant medicine, it's almost always the two of us because there's actually evidence suggesting that having the male-female dyad and having two people is really, really supportive to creating the right kind of safe, comfortable container. Because sometimes people really connect more with Margaret. She's got that deep, nurturing softness about her, and I have a different kind of an energy. And some of them, especially guys, tend to maybe relate a little bit more to me as a peer. So they have both of those
Do you
qualities.
find that true, Margaret, also, that some people relate to one or the other?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And when people are in an enhanced psychological state, as in our breathwork offerings or our space holding that we do for people who want to explore psychedelic, psilocybin medicine in particular, they really resonate sometimes with a nurturing energy, other times more with a strong, solid, secure base that Eddie provides.
And since you mentioned it, let's talk a little bit about that part of your practice, because I spoke to you, I guess maybe a year ago or something like that, And you were telling me you were getting more and more into this, and I'm very pleased that you tell me that it's now kind of really taken off. You work with psychedelics. What is that all about?
Well, I'm going to let Margaret answer that, but I want to make a point, first of all, that I think is really important, that we do not work out of our licenses as certified alcohol and drug counselors when we do this work. This is
Okay.
separate work. We're even legally separate. So I just want to make that point clear that we're not using our licenses in this work.
Well, it's interesting also, Eddie, in terms of, so this is something you're moving more into, or
Yeah.
certainly you've told me over the last year or so. And so, again, for somebody who doesn't know too much about it, teach me as well, Margaret. So what does your work involving psychedelics entail?
Well, it's really, there's a phrase, and I forget who came up with it, but it can be used for the betterment of well people. So we want to work with people who are stable and balanced and ready to explore an expanded state of consciousness. And so we are all about harm reduction. We want to offer safe and sacred space for people who want to explore the use of psilocybin, which is also known as magic mushrooms. And so we create a whole program. We have many preparation sessions, typically 3, could be more if people want more preparation. But in each session, we build trust and a therapeutic relationship. We get to know the person, their fears and concerns and desires and hopes. And we work with them using their breath, and that's called integrative breath work. And we also work with them to develop their capacity for creating balanced states of mind. If they feel overwhelmed, let's say they're anxious, we have specific, small, simple ways that they can use their breath, their body, and their mind to come back into an emotional balance point.
And
And
it's so perfect timing that we're doing the show that for some reason, Margaret, I don't quite understand why, but my wife has been interested in this subject for quite a while. She wants to try it. We'll talk about this.
Has she seen this
Since you're
book?
showing something, what are you showing, Eddie?
Well, this is a book that seems to be making the rounds. It's called How to Change Your Mind, and it's by a guy named Michael Pollan, who's written books about other subjects, totally unrelated. And this book it's like a bestseller. And what it does is the subtitle is What the New Science of Psychedelics Teaches Us About Consciousness, Dying, Addiction, Depression, and Transcendence. So a lot of people were reading this book and getting interested in this subject. And then he came out with a Netflix series recently. There's 4 episodes on Netflix, and it seems like everybody's watching it, and it's really well done. So here's what's happening. People are going, well, you know what? I want to check this out. And it's making the rounds. And Margaret brought up harm reduction. Well, people might decide, well, I'll just do this at home. And they take a bunch of psilocybin and they don't have support. There may be some emotional stuff that's going on that all of a sudden just blows up. And they don't have a container within which that they can move through that and feel supported and safe. Or maybe they go to, do you know what Bonnaroo is? These kind of festivals. And it seems like a good time, but the next thing you know, they can't find their friend and they're getting pushed up to the stage. And this is what you call a bad trip.
So talk about
So
what you just mentioned, the Netflix series. Do you know the name of it, or is it
it's called
just
How to Change Your Mind.
okay? Because that may have been what my wife saw, and all of a sudden she comes to me. She wants to try this
Yeah,
again.
yeah.
So I'll ask Margaret back to even trying it. Why should somebody even consider this or try it? What's the value of doing so?
well, the value of doing it is to really get to know themselves better, and it can be kind of a deeper dive. And I've heard it said that these are kind of the sacred molecule. They open up capacities within our system, our brain, our nervous system, to reveal our personal, intimate truth. So we know things, but we don't often have full access to that knowing. So when we are under the influence of psychedelics, and in particular psilocybin, because that's what we know best, I'll talk about that. There is a revealing, a bodily sense, a felt sense in our bodies of what we know to be authentic, real, and true in this moment for me personally.
Now,
And that's huge.
have both of you had experience with
Oh
this?
yeah, sure.
Now, talk to me a little bit about that because now you have me curious. So you've had experience with this, so you know what you're talking about because you've gone through this.
We know the terrain.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you have the experience together, or do you do it separately, or explain what happens, how somebody uses this?
We've experienced it together.
Yeah, but also a little bit separate. I mean, we've actually had experience with several different plant medicines and psychedelics. Okay, and this actually began when it was in a therapeutic setting. I won't go into any of the details, but it was a situation where we worked with people and we had an opportunity to know what the actual patients were experiencing, which was very important, you know? So then we started working with some other plant medicines, ayahuasca in particular, and then eventually psilocybin, and we've done it together. But I also had an experience where I did psilocybin in combination with San Pedro, which is a mescaline-based cactus that grows naturally. And that was separate from Margaret. But typically we do it together.
Okay. And
Yeah.
when you do it together, how long does the process take, or describe what actually happens, Margaret?
It's about a 6 to 7 hour process. And so we take it in the morning and make sure that we're not eating a full meal. So, there is some digestive effects. And so, we just take it easy. And we're just sitting together. We might meditate. We might do a little bit of breath work. And then when we feel the effects coming on, I like to move my body. So we might be dancing, we might be just moving about, we might be having a conversation that is that's profound. We can meaningful. We can get into subjects that are interesting to the two of us. Listen to music or watch some videos that are really interesting and captivating.
Music is a big part of the experience, and I'm very good with music. So I've created playlists of music that can evoke emotional experiences. There's one piece of music we were actually talking to somebody about yesterday that sat with us, and that's Samuel Barber's Adagio for strings. And if people follow classical music, they're familiar with Samuel Barber and his Adagio for strings. It's about a 12-minute piece, and she was talking about how what did she say? Something about it was experiencing, like, this was during her ceremony, right? She was experiencing angels and all this kind of stuff. So it can really evoke images, it can evoke emotional responses. And psilocybin in particular really is an embodied experience. So you really feel it in your body. So, Margaret, she dances. I don't necessarily dance, but I definitely move, and it's wonderful to move your body, to go for walks. And you can experience it in different ways. You can experience what's called a macro dose, which is a pretty substantial amount. And that's a very immersive experience typically, where you're not going out and doing things, right? But you can also do moderate doses where you have the effect, but it's not a full-blown kind of thing. And then you can also microdose. And microdosing is a whole nother conversation where people are taking tiny, tiny amounts that are what are referred to as sub-perceptual. So it's not like, it's really that noticeable, but you're sort of feeling like, oh, I feel a little lighter, or maybe just a little brighter.
It can be enhancing your creative work.
Mm-hmm.
So, many people use it for creativity and
Well,
focus.
microdosing really took off in Silicon Valley with people doing tech work, and they just became so much more creative and productive in IT work.
Well, you forgot, I think, the most important usage of it, of course, is you can use these psychedelics before you do the Blainesworld podcast.
Exactly. We didn't do that today, but
Okay, you didn't. Well, I won't put you on the spot. Talk to me, guys, about what research says about this. In other words, you've been to it now for a bit of time. What are the results of it, or what does the study say?
They've been studying it for a long time.
The research is exciting and really compelling. We feel like we're on the wave of a new psychiatric revolution. One of the things that was of interest to us in particular was the addiction. You know, there have been studies that indicate that there is great hope for the release of addiction through psilocybin use. And personally, I used to have a glass of wine very often and always had a bottle in the kitchen, you know, just in case I felt like, oh, I just need to relax and de-stress. As I use psilocybin, slowly my desire for alcohol just decreased to the point where I hardly ever drink. It may just be, you know, once every 3 months now. But I have lost my desire. The allure has just left. I don't think that it's bad, and I still will drink when I want to, but it just doesn't have a draw.
Yeah. Let me address that a little bit more. We're going to back up because these medicines, and that's how we refer to them, whether it's peyote or San Pedro or psilocybin or ayahuasca, have been used for thousands of years in traditional indigenous cultures. And there's kind of a joke like, well, we don't know what Jesus was doing when he was wandering around in the desert for 40 days and what he might have picked up and eaten. You know, I mean, we don't really know, but they've been used for healing purposes and transformational purposes for thousands of years. And then starting in the 50s, LSD started to be used in studies with tremendous effectiveness. And it was done, you know, you can research this stuff. And then it became illegal because there was out of control use of a lot of psychedelics. And the government kind of freaked out and said, we just have to make all this stuff illegal. And it really shut down a lot of studies. But they've been coming back up. And MDMA, which is not a plant medicine, but it's debatable whether it's a psychedelic or not, is now soon to be released as widely available for use, particularly for PTSD. And there are studies being done, trials being done right now with the FDA, and there's happening right now out in Waynesville. So, and then psilocybin is going to come soon. They're studying this stuff. It's estimated within 2 or 3 years that it's going to be available, so that if your wife wanted to do it, one of her options would be to go and actually work with a psychiatrist, you know.
So if you do, it's legal if you do that?
Not now.
Well,
Right.
in Washington and Oregon,
Yeah, a few places it's
there are
legal.
some states and areas of states that it is already legal.
So we're seeing this trend. We're seeing a sharp trend in interest in this in the general public, and we're seeing progress being made in research, and we're seeing progress made legally in many, many areas so that people have access to this. One of the things we talk about is life is very stressful for many people, Blaine, not for you because you're like Mr. Chill, but a lot of people deal with anxiety and depression. And what do? They go to their doctor, they go to their psychiatrist, and they get these SSRIs and SNRIs, antidepressants, and all these kind of medicines. And we're not knocking those. Those are very, very necessary in many, many cases.
Effective.
They're very effective, but they also sort of numb us. And in many cases, people have been using these for years and haven't really made progress.
Right.
And I can't tell you how many people we talk to and say, I tried everything and it just didn't help. And then they find these plant medicines and it's a different kind of experience that really helps. And we really caution, it's not a magic bullet. It's not for everybody. And there are some people who should not be doing it.
Who shouldn't be doing it?
Well, untreated high blood pressure, a history of seizure, if they're not stable, if they're living with bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and that's not necessarily something that it could really destabilize them. And these are medical questions, see? So we don't get involved in these medical questions, but we do screen people and check and see what their history is. and then suggest perhaps they need to consult with a medical professional before they move forward.
What's interesting about this, it reminds me of the whole discussion about hemp. Like 5 years ago or 6 years ago, I was working with a client of mine who was trying to set up a hemp network, or stores and whatnot. At the time, if you recall, just the same kind of thing. It was borderline legal, illegal. Some people were favoring it, some people weren't, and now it's all everywhere. Or CBD, or you name it. So
Yeah,
it seems this movement is exactly the same place that was a couple of years ago.
I think so.
I think that's a fair statement.
Yes.
Yeah. So go back to you folks. So if somebody's interested in what you're talking about, and again, my wife, other people as well, you're recommending a great recommendation on the book. So we'll check out the book or the Netflix series. And so back to you. So why would they then contact you or work with you in using these?
I think what we didn't actually say is the integration after
Yeah,
the journey is the
Gotcha.
most important piece, in our opinion, and the missing piece these days, because many people are having an experience, and it might be in another country, Costa Rica, Jamaica, Peru. They come back and they feel transformed. But yet there's this default mode network that's been with us since, early on in utero, and it comes back in slowly, slowly. And unless we work with that open, expanded state of mind, these new neural pathways that have been generated by the plant medicines, then the effects may not be as beneficial as we had hoped for. So when we are integrating afterward in the weeks and the months and maybe even years afterward, we want to make sure that we are strengthening the neural networks that were opened up and presented to us as a growth enhancing pathway. So let's say somebody had a realization. Maybe they feel like, okay, I need to be kinder to my spouse or something like that. Or I feel a great compassion that I've never felt before while I was, under the influence. And so they change their behavior. They pause, they turn toward the other person. They start to find their compassionate presence with that person, and that new neural pathway becomes strengthened because it was always there, and they feel it deeply and they want it deeply. And yet the old ways of behaving, the protective, armor guarded ways that have developed since childhood, are probably very strong and protective. So when someone has a realization that they want to move toward, they have to kind of work with that through their body.
I've got a perfect example of someone that we've worked with who came to us with a lot of severe anxiety. He had a history of childhood trauma. He had been a law enforcement officer in New York City and was a first responder at 9/11. So you're talking about a complex trauma, right? And so he was seeing a therapist and doing a lot of work, but he wanted to kind of take a deeper dive. So he came to us, he did ceremony, and this anxiety came up, which guess what comes up, right? So we had talked to him and prepared him how to use breathing practices and movement so that when the anxiety would arise, rather than trying to avoid it, he could actually embrace it. He could actually sit with it. We have an expression, we say yes to whatever comes to you. Just say yes. And if a doorway opens, walk through it. This is not our culture typically, Blaine. We've been conditioned to avoid anything that's uncomfortable. And if we didn't like the way we feel, we consume something or somehow distracted ourselves from it. But that doesn't support healing and transformation. Now, obviously, you need discretion as you're doing this, and you need good support and good coping strategies. So we offered these to him. So I ran into him about 10 days later. Well, I didn't run into him. It was a conscious, intentional conversation. And I asked him how he's doing, and he says, I still have anxiety that comes up, but now when it comes up, I look at it as a friend. And see, he understands that this anxiety was putting him in hyper alert to try to keep him safe, to try to protect him. All these behaviors have a job to do. But now he can look at that and go, all right, I understand what you're doing, anxiety, But you know what? I'm not going to let this bother me. I'm just going to be with it and allow this experience to be part of what's going on right now and not freak out. And he said he kept working with this and he keeps working with this. And when he does this, he is reinforcing those new neural pathways that have opened up through this whole process. This is integration. This is taking an experience and what we've learned and these new skills to transform our lives.
You mentioned the term, Eddie, before, ceremony. And what exactly is the ceremony you were talking about?
The ceremony is the process by which they join us in our safe and sacred space. And there are, rituals that they may want to do. And so we create what we consider to be a ceremony, something that feels familiar, sacred, and right, supportive. And then when they take the medicine, we're there to support them the whole time.
So that's the all-day experience. We shy away from using the word trip,
Yeah.
taking a trip, because that's associated with recreational use.
And what you did before, I thought was so cool, I was going to mention it. I like it when you address it too, call it plant-based medicine. It's a much more user-friendly, acceptable way of talking about it. So I like how you describe it.
That's how it's being used as medicine.
Yes. In a therapeutic setting, it's a helper and a healer.
Well, also it is right. It is all plant-based stuff. That's where it comes from.
Yeah, talk about the mushrooms, how they grow from the ground. I love how you talk about that.
Yeah, the analogy is, and I believe this is true, as mushrooms grow, we look in the forest and there's decomposing material, and then all of a sudden there's a mushroom that sprouts up. And so when we take those mushrooms into our bodies, there is a similar feeling of being very rooted, very grounded, very present in our own bodies, in our muscles and our cells and our inner truth, our inner essence, you can say. And I heard something, and I think it was from the movie, here's another source, Fantastic Fungi, or
Right,
Fungi. People pronounce it different ways.
Great, that's really good to watch.
Yes.
Fantastic fungi.
There's a whole mycelial network underneath our feet. Wherever we're walking, there is a network underneath. Plants and mushrooms are growing underneath and they're communicating with each other under there. And so this is a network that we are tapping into. This is something that is for us, to help us, to heal us. It is of the earth.
Now talk about then, again, the term is magic mushrooms, right? Or that's the term that's being used now. So were these actual mushrooms and then something is done with them, or what makes a magic mushroom?
The psychoactive ingredient is an inherent part of it.
Yeah.
So you have shiitakes,
Right.
and you have these.
Different.
And it's good to know which is which.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
So, and they're both grown in the ground?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
All the mushrooms are, yeah.
And there are different strains of magic mushrooms.
Mm-hmm.
And here's something, a lot of people, maybe people Blaine,
Right.
are growing them.
I was just going to ask. Yeah.
You can buy these kits. You can't go and buy legally magic mushrooms on the market, but you can buy everything you need to grow them.
And that is legal to buy the spores.
To buy all that stuff, there's a process. I can't explain it. We don't do it. Call it, you inoculate it and all this kind of stuff. But there's people who've got this stuff growing in their closets or their attics or their basements, growing their own to use.
And what's incredible as you're talking about it, it's really strange when you think about it. So that's legal, and you can buy the stuff that's legal, but if it produces it, then it's all of a sudden not legal.
It's a silly thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a silly legal thing. And hopefully that will
Well, San Pedro is the same way.
Yeah.
You can go to Walmart and buy a San Pedro cactus, but to extract the ingredients and use it as a psychedelic medicine is absolutely illegal.
When do you see that changing? Is that in a couple of years, you think?
probably.
2-3 years, I think
That's what they
it's
say.
yeah, 2 or 3 years. I think you'll see some big changes, and it's probably going to be a state here, a state there, and then the next thing you know,
Gradual.
it'll be more uniform.
It'll probably be used, medically first, in clinics, and, very regulated and controlled, and then eventually.
But there's always going to be people doing this.
Yeah. What we're creating though is the safe space, the harm reduction.
Yeah.
Talk about then, let's use that to segue into some of the other stuff you do. And I know you've always been into meditation and mindfulness. Is there a difference between the two? Meditation and mindfulness?
Oh boy. Meditation is a broader term.
Okay,
And there's all kinds of meditations, guided meditations, and so on. Mindfulness is actually a term that's become very popular.
right,
It actually originated in the Buddhist tradition, but as it's presented, it's basically the idea of having present moment awareness, moment to moment of what your experience is, intentionally paying attention to what's happening moment to moment. So this could be something as simple as, Blaine, you decide, well, I got a glass of water. So instead of just taking a sip and not even thinking about it, just really being intentional about tasting the water, noticing it go down the throat, feeling hydrated, you're really tuning in and exploring the full range of experiences on all the sensory levels, as well as how am I interpreting it? What story am I telling myself about this experience? Feeling into paying attention, this kind of thing. That's because there are other kind of meditations that are completely different than that. And by the way, Margaret's going to need to go pretty soon,
sure.
but I can continue to hang out for a while.
It's funny, we're winding this down because I wanted to ask you the question then. If folks want to get in touch with either two of you or the both of you to either talk about some of the other stuff you talked about, plant-based medicine, or some of the other work you do within the company of Mindful Emergence, best bet is to do what?
Well, they can go to our website, mindfulemergence.com. So that's just like my shirt, mindfulemergence.com. And there's, hopefully that's not coming out backwards.
No, it's coming perfect, yeah.
Yeah. And there's ways to it just says schedule a meeting. Typically what people do, Blaine, is they go to our website, they look around, they go, well, I really want to talk to these guys about what they're doing. So they press a button that says something like contact us.
Schedule a consultation.
Schedule a consultation. We do a free consultation on Zoom where both Margaret and I show up just like this. And they can ask us anything. We can explain how we work. And then if they decide to work with us, then we just take it to the next step. But that's all done just by the website. But I can also give out my phone number.
Okay.
All right. If people want to just call, my number is 828-772-1746.
And as you know from your radio days, Eddie, would you repeat that?
828-772-1746.
Okay. I'd like to thank both of you for being my guests on the Blaine's World podcast, Eddie LeShure and Margaret Kirschner. I'd also like to thank my producer, Cappy Tassetti, and hopefully we'll speak to you or actually see you in person sometime in the next couple of years. And we'll look forward to having you join the Blaine's World podcast next time it's on the air. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you, Blaine.